on then, mate. Come on. So here is my childhood bedroom. We moved into the house around 2009-ish, I think. But of course the walls haven't always been green. I don't really know why I picked that colour, to be honest, because it's a little bit gross. So I'm a massive Arsenal fan. I've got a few of their kits here. I've got this one, which is Thierry Henry. This is the last kit which we wore back in Highbury at 2006. But I just absolutely love this shirt. I love the colours, and you've got to have the king on the back. I've got that one there of Dennis Bergkamp, which is quite a cool away kit. And I want to show you this little guy as well. He's trying to escape. This is my pet tortoise, Uruguay. He's from Serbia, but he lives in Cornwall now. And I got him for a birthday present a couple of years ago, but he lives here. Well, I've grown up in Cornwall all my life, and I went to school in Newquay. But since going to uni, I've actually realised how remote Cornwall actually is. I mean, it's a beautiful place to live, but after a while you just start to realise that everybody knows each other, and it just is a bit claustrophobic. So this is me at Hampton Court Palace with a portrait of Henry VIII. I must have been around 11 or 12 there, I think. Oh my days. This is a picture of me and my dad, and that haircut is awful. I don't know much about my family tree apart from like my close family, but I know my generation and my parents' generation is mainly Cornish. I do remember when I was a bit younger, my mum told me that we had links to Scotland and Ireland, so hopefully there's something exciting within that. I just really hope that I don't come from a boring family. Here you go, Mum.
Oh, good timing, love.
Okay. So, Mum, what have you got for me?
Well, after our conversation, I've done a little bit of looking around at my history, particularly on my mum's side, Jean Sutherland Clark, to her father, which was Fred Sutherland Clark, to find out a little bit more about him and how and where he came from.
So, is he my great-granddad then?
Yes, he is. He'll be your great-granddad. I don't know very much about him at all. There was some talk of him being Scottish or Irish. So what I've done is I wrote off for his birth certificate, which I thought you'd be interested to see, which is this one, born in 1903.
Wow.
In
West Ham.
Sorry. We're both Arsenal supporters, so that's a bit of a shock. But I don't know how he comes to be in West Ham at all, except that he's a boiler maker.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and so is his father, so they're obviously working in that sort of trade. Now, Fred Sutherland Clark was evacuated after spending many years in the Home Guard in London during the Second World War, and evacuated eventually to Newquay. So, in fact, we're not really Cornish.
Wow.
Except maybe you.
Yeah.
Because you were born here.
Of course. Interesting. So there must have been something that made him leave Scotland, is that right?
Well, I think it was Scotland, we don't know, and that's what we need to find out. So I've had another look online following Fred Sutherland Clark. What we do come to, quite interesting, is a whole load of other Sutherlands And these all have that as a surname, and they're all associated with the Sutherland area of Scotland.
Oh, so it's an actual place, Sutherland is as well?
Yep, again, northeast of Scotland. And in fact, some of them are part of the Earls of Sutherland. So there's one Earl that I thought you'd be really interested in hearing about, and this is, he goes back beyond the Earls of Sinclair, of which we have all that relations to. So he is here, and his name is Earl Robert Pitcairn Stuart, and that is the royal house of Stuart.
No way.
Yes, and he was born.
No way.
Yep, born in Orkney, in Scotland, which was then obviously part of the whole of the Scottish lands and the Highlands, in the Palace of Yards at Kirkwall on the Orkney Islands.
So I'm guessing if he's a royal Stuart, there must be some other royalty in his line.
Well, that's what this would say, yes.
I think I've got to head up to Scotland.
I think that's the place to go.
To find out more about my Scottish relatives, I went to speak to historian and senior lecturer in Scottish history, Dr. Amy Blakeway.
So Amy, my 15th time great-grandfather is Earl Robert Pitcairn Stuart. Could you tell me a little bit about him, please?
So Earl Robert is a fascinating man. He starts life on the wrong side of the bedclothes, basically. He's the illegitimate son of King James V of Scots. Originally sort of really destined for a career in the church, but with the Scottish Reformation, so the break away from the Catholic Church towards a Reformed church, or they called Protestant church, the kind of careers that were available in the Catholic Church for sort of noble second sons or illegitimate sons aren't there anymore. So Robert Stuart ends up, instead of this stellar career in the church, being given the earldom of Orkney. If James V had, if he was able to sort of look down and see what happened to his son, his boy Robert, named after Robert the Bruce, from whom of course they're both also descended. If he could look down and see what happened to his boy Robert, I think he'd be very pleased to see one of the sons of the royal house, a Stuart Earl of the blood, with a chance to control and consolidate power in Orkney.
What was James like as a ruler, even though he was only there for a short period of time?
He's a very powerful king, really interested in expanding Scotland's image and status abroad. He oversees really kind of a big overhaul of the Scottish legal system. The highest criminal court, the High Court of Justiciary, really gets going in James's rule, and the Court of Session, still Scotland's highest civil court, is really sort of set on kind of what looks a bit more like a modern footing in the 1530s also. And in addition to that, he presides over this really glamorous and fascinating court. He's a really great patron of literature. And some of these poems are really, really funny. And from them we can learn all sorts of things, including about the court pets. I don't know if you know that James had a parrot.
Really?
Yeah, and this is immortalised in one of the poems. We know it's a real parrot because we can track across the financial accounts and see the payments for it. And he loved his dogs. He had a huge kennel of dogs. And these were so well known at court that poems were made about the dogs as well, including one who was naughty enough that he jumped on the king's bed when it had its cloth of gold bedspread on it. So I think it's amazing. In studying this period in history, we get these kind of little personal connections, and we feel quite close actually. So yeah, a really canny man, and a fascinating and overlooked period in Scottish history.
So I think finding out that I'm related to James V, King of Scotland, and then him dating back to all the kings before him, and the first kings of Scotland, as in Robert the Bruce, is unbelievable. But finding out that his mother is Margaret Tudor, English princess, I think is quite a significant part of this. So I think she's the person who I've got to find more about. To understand more about Margaret Tudor, I spoke to senior lecturer in early modern Scottish history, Dr. Lucy Dean.
So Lucy, I've just got back from Edinburgh and I've been amazed to find out that my 17th time great-grandmother was Margaret Tudor. What was her life like as an English princess, but also as a Scottish queen?
So I think it's really interesting that you've managed to trace back to Margaret. I think she's a really interesting character. So when she arrives in Scotland, she has a number of members of her household who are English, and it remains that way until she reaches a certain age. So it's clear that her parents had put in certain protective qualities around her because she was still growing up when she arrives in Scotland. James and Margaret's marriage was short, relatively speaking, because of James's death in 1513. So obviously Margaret's still very young throughout this whole period. She has a lot of pregnancies, which must have been very difficult on her body. And as I'm sure you've figured out from your research, not many of those children survive. There's been some really interesting work on Margaret's letters because there's a lot of presumptions that she was quite needy of Henry VIII's assistance, but ultimately that's probably not surprising, being that she's in a situation where her own husband has died and she remarries quite quickly, but that's not necessarily a good decision.
You've just touched on it briefly there about them being brother and sister, making Henry VIII then my 17th time great uncle. What was their relationship like as brother and sister?
Their relationship would seem very odd to us, but would probably not be that unusual for the period in which they were living. We don't see letters that suggest any kind of brotherly and sisterly love.
Well, it's really intriguing, Lucy, what you've said about their relationship. I think I should do a bit more research on Henry's upbringing to see why that's the case.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a really good way to go.
I met up with historian, author and podcaster Adam Pennington to understand what Henry VIII was truly like.
So Adam, I've done some research and my 17th time great-grandmother was Margaret Tudor, meaning her brother, King Henry VIII, was my 17th time great-uncle. Could you tell me a bit about him? Not only what was he like as a ruler, but what was he like as a person?
The thing is that Henry VIII was not raised to be the heir apparent. His brother Prince Arthur was the heir apparent. And because of that fact, Prince Arthur was firstly mostly raised away from the court, and because of that fact, Arthur was raised away from the rest of his siblings. Henry, by contrast, and he freely admits it himself, was raised among the women. So he was raised predominantly by his mother and his two sisters, the Princesses Margaret, who you descend from, and Mary. And because of that fact, Henry VIII was not particularly close to his father as a young boy. He was primarily raised around women. He adored his mother, and we can even surmise that Henry was likely educated by his mother and taught by her, because if we look at the Henry VIII's handwriting, for example, it's almost identical to his mother's, which would suggest that she probably taught him to write. So he was raised without the expectation of being the heir. He was a very different character to his brother. His brother was much more in the mould of his father, quite reserved. He was once described as being incredibly gangly and thin, and Henry was the opposite. Already, even at the age of 10, when Prince Arthur married Catherine of Aragon, who Henry VIII would later go on to marry, at the wedding, Henry, at the age of 10, he threw off his jacket and danced around, whilst his brother sort of was much more reserved. So when Arthur died at the age of 15, suddenly Henry is ripped from that female household and placed into the stewardship of his father. And as I said, his father and Henry were very, very different men. So Henry VII then immediately closed rank and stopped Henry from things like jousting and overexerting himself, because he was terrified that Henry might fall ill, or because stupidly one of the beliefs as to why Arthur died was that there was a sense that he had overexerted himself in the marriage bed. So Prince Henry is ripped from his mother's sort of and his sisters, put into the household of his father, and they were very different people. And for that reason, when his father died, there was just this sense of freedom, and Henry VIII sort of ran wild.
It's really interesting Henry VIII's relationship with his father, I think I've got to find a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say that's the next step for you to definitely explore.
I spoke with author and historian Nathan Amin to see what my 18th time great-grandfather, Henry VII, was like as king. So Nathan, tell me a little bit about Henry VII.
I think the problem with Henry VII is he's come down to us as being considered dull and boring. A miser king who just concentrated on collecting his riches and being quite miserable in every shape. And this is a problem, because this has been the story fed to us for hundreds of years. We've got to remember, Henry invaded this country with a small army, and that involved, first of all, putting together an army, invading, marching for 200 miles through Wales, hostile territory, into England, and then persuading his men to go to war against a king with a bigger and richer army. You don't do that unless you've got something in your charisma. You know, you need to have some sort of appeal to men when you're looking into their eyes and speaking to them. So you say straight away from the off, Henry clearly had something about him. We have his financial records, and we can see what he liked to spend his money on. He loved music, he loved dancers, he loved Welsh mead, which, you know, obviously he must have had that as a child in Wales, and when he became king, and you got all the money in the world, you're going to spend on things that you want. But I think he does deserve a lot of respect. And I think what's fascinating about him is he truly was an underdog king. When he won the crown and he walked into London for the first time, I think on the 3rd of September 1485, he'd never been to London before. No king before William the Conqueror knew less of the country that he now ruled. You know, he was called by Richard III during that propaganda war before the Battle of Bosworth, an unknown Welshman.
Yeah.
And that truly was who he was. No one knew who he was. He didn't know the people he had to rule, and yet he managed to preside over the first successful succession from father to son in 87 years. You know, that is a true accomplishment, and by marrying his daughter into the Scottish line, that did create the path for the establishment eventually of Great Britain.
Well, this whole journey has just been amazing, you know, finding out who I'm related to 3 generations back, and then going further and further back and realising I'm related to Scottish royalty, and then Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII, and now standing here at the birthplace of my 18th time great-grandfather, Henry VII. It's just so surreal. This whole journey has been amazing, and I just can't believe that it's me who is related to all these people. I mean, growing up in Cornwall and then finding out we've got Scottish and English royalty is it blows my head a little bit, but I would like to find out like what relation I am to the throne, like how close I am to the throne, because I mean, if enough people died, theoretically I could be king.